guys would never stare at someone like that who's in your seat, would you? No, you sit in different seats every week, right? Hi, foxes. Hey, you guys. Hey, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and do something. That paddle that you got that was on your seat when you came in, I want you to go ahead and take that, and I want you to put it under your seat. And I want you to not pick it up for the next 35 minutes or even think about it. So we're on the same page. So this is a number of years before we planted the church. I'll always remember this. I was sitting in a board meeting, which is God's reminder to us that hell is real. At least it felt like that at the time. Not now, but it felt like it at the time. And we were discussing what do we do about people who come to our church, this other church that I was at, what do we do about people who come to our church who don't believe exactly what we believe? And some of us were of the opinion that we should be welcoming and open and make this a place where people can figure out where they believe. Others of us were not so sure. And I remember one person said at one point in time, they said, I really think when a guest comes in the door, we should welcome them, we should shake their hand, and then we should hand them, the first thing before they ever go into a service, we should hand them a statement of all of our beliefs. And if they agree with it, they can come in. And if they don't agree with it, then they should go somewhere else. And I remember they said that, and I felt so many emotions in the moment. Like I was mad, and I was confused, and I was cold. That was probably more from the air conditioning in the room than anything that has to do with the story. But I remember I felt all these different things. And at first I was upset that someone would have that pompous of opinion, that they would be that arrogant in their statements. But the other thing I was really confused about, because I thought here's somebody who I know if someone was coming in who didn't believe in God, they would welcome him in. And so what's the standard for figuring that out? So if someone say I don't know if I believe any of these at 0%, that's where I'm at. The person would go, well, yeah, you can come in. Okay, but of course, if the person who agreed with absolutely everything we believed, of course, they could come in too. So if you're at 0%, you could come in. If you're at 100%, you can come in. But if you're at 80%, no, you're not allowed to come. And I was this is the weirdest thing ever. The fact that we're saying people who aren't sure, who don't perfectly match up, that they wouldn't be allowed in. But this is the interesting thing about it is I think that idea is really common in a lot of churches and communities of faith. And what we think is we think that church is just all about beliefs. And my guess is you've probably had this assumption as well, that that's all church is. It's just beliefs. And so Sunday morning, we just talk about beliefs. Other things we do, we just talk about beliefs. If you go to, you'll see this kind of in the literature as well. If you do this, if you go to our website, you'll find a statement of our beliefs, and you'll find that on every single church. And it's kind of held up as this ultimate thing that the what of beliefs is what matters, which makes what we're doing today so interesting. So we're in this series, How to Choose a Church, and we are in the third week of this series, and we are just now going to start talking about beliefs. And I'm sure for some people, you look at that and you go, just now? We're 3 weeks in. Why are we just now getting to, what do we even talk about the other weeks? Because I think the assumption typically is that, if we're going to do a series on how to choose a church, then it's all it is you need to figure out what you believe. You need to find a church that matches up with it, and then you're good. If the church doesn't match up with it, you need to go somewhere else. Because that's all that matters when it comes to beliefs. And so we're going to dive into this idea of beliefs today, but we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to look at a side of beliefs that isn't ever touched on, but is incredibly significant. And this is the statement that we're going to go off of this morning. How you believe matters as much as what you believe. How you believe matters as much as what you believe. And last year, I went with a couple other people. We went down to a Young the Giant concert. And if you've never heard the band Young the Giant, if you're unfamiliar with them, they probably have 2 songs that you've heard before. But we were really excited about it. The concert was down in Louisville, so we were pretty pumped up about it. The concert was free, so we were especially excited about it. And so we got down there super early, and they had the opening band come out. And I forget the name of the band. They were from Cincinnati. But they were 3 guys who were in their mid-20s to early 30s. I'll never forget, they wore Hawaiian shirts, and they had sunglasses. It was 8 o'clock at night, and I was why? I don't understand. But they had, they weren't very good, but they had so much energy. I have never seen 3 people on stage have as much energy as they did. They did a rendition of a Britney Spears song, and it was kind of awesome. And I more than once that week found myself listening to Toxic, unashamed. I feel embarrassed now. But at the time, I wasn't. And so they played, and like they were so exciting. And then the band we had waited for, Young the Giant, they came out, and we were so pumped up. And they were, I'm not saying this to like kind of dissuade any of your future concert decisions, but they were awful. Like, they were so bad. And we were talking about it afterwards. We were like, the music was fine. Like, it didn't sound wonderful, but it sounded okay. They played the songs that we wanted them to. So, like, all those things were right. And so, like, why were they so awful? Well, it's because, like, they didn't care. Like, I swear the bass player did not move. His feet did not move 1 inch the entire time, which I understand that kind of goes with bass players. No offense to any of our bass players. I know that kind of comes with the territory. But, like, the whole group as a whole on the stage, like, the only person who moved an inch was the lead singer. And that's because he didn't play an instrument. And so that's kind of all he had. But it was like we went to this thing and we were so excited about it. And then we walked away and it was kind of like, so what was so upsetting? Well, like, they played everything right. Like, the what of their music was correct. They played the right notes. It was how they played it that was so bothersome to us because it was like they didn't care at all. And I think that's true of belief and faith as well. And yet we never get into it. That if we're going to talk about beliefs, we only ever talk about the what of our beliefs. And if you're having trouble distinguishing them, we could say it like this. The what of your beliefs is the object of your belief. Or maybe more clearly, the statements of your belief. I believe in this. I believe in this. So that's the what. The how of your belief is really about your posture that you take within your beliefs. It's not specifically the things you believe. It is how you carry the things you believe and how you hold them and how they change how you live. That gets into the posture of your beliefs. And I think the idea that most people have is like, well, isn't that soft? Like, does that actually really matter? Is that a big deal? Like, isn't it like the secondary thing? Isn't the what of beliefs, isn't that all that matters? And this is what I see, and this is why I think this is so important, is when I look at different kind of streams of belief in our world today, I see incredible arrogance within each one of them. That regardless of what we could say, belief system is, whether it's Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Judaism, like, there's incredible arrogance that seems to come within each belief system. And I understand partially where that comes from. Like, for each of these belief systems, we are making statements about what is ultimate truth, what is ultimate reality, and what is true of eternity. And so I understand when you're making these like big statements about these huge issues, about like defining it to a point, I understand how some arrogance can get associated with it. But this is what cracks me up is some people, you hear that and people will go, and I hear this a lot, people go, well, that's why I don't do, and they'll always phrase it like this, well, that's why I don't do religion, is because I'm sick of the arrogance. For people to say that they know what is ultimate truth, I think is ridiculous. How could we know? Which, here's the hilarious thing about that statement, if you've ever heard it before, or if you've ever made it before, is what you're doing in that moment is you're making an equally arrogant statement. Like, you're going, well, these belief systems, they think they know what's true, and I think there's no way to know what's true, which is in and of itself a statement about ultimate truth. Except the only difference there is you're going like, hey, if you're Jewish, I find myself within this group of millions of other people who believe the same thing. When you do it yourself, you're just going, just me, I think I'm right. I think I got it. But the rest of you, you're arrogant. But the interesting thing about it is, so we've got all these different belief systems and an arrogance that seems to be associated with it. But when we look at Christianity, and this is true of Christianity, I mean, the arrogance is there. There's no doubt about it. But when we look at the belief system that we find ourselves in, it was meant to be different. And what we usually think is we usually simply think that Jesus was teaching us a different belief or a different set of beliefs. But what he was also doing within that was he was teaching us a different way to believe or how to carry the beliefs. And we see this very clearly. In Matthew 7:16, these are Jesus' words. He says this, by their fruit you will recognize them. Now, he doesn't say by their beliefs, by their statements, by the fact that they have everything right. No, he says by their fruit. And so when he's saying this, he's referring to it is how they live their lives and what you see as a result of it. It is the way in which they carry themselves, or we're saying it like this morning. It is the posture with which they live their lives that you'll recognize them. And some people take that, and there's a famous quote by a guy by the name of St. Francis of Assisi, and he says it like this. He says, "Preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words." And some people, they've taken that way too far, and they'll go, yeah, that's what it means. It means I just need to live my life, and I don't need to say anything about Jesus. They go, well, hang on. He says, when necessary, kind of the understated thing being, it will be necessary at one point in time. Don't use that as an excuse to completely back down from boldness in your faith. But I think what Jesus says here is so significant, is that he is not just leading us into a different set of beliefs, but into a different way of holding those beliefs, of carrying those beliefs, of how we posture ourselves within our lives. And the interesting thing to me is, for all the kind of hoopla we put about beliefs in church, we never talk about the posture with which we are meant to carry our beliefs. And I think it's incredibly important. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a story out of the book of Mark. And if you're unfamiliar with the book of Mark and what it is, we have 4 accounts in the Bible of the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So Mark is one of those. And so it just tells different stories of Jesus' teachings and some things he did and some things that happened to him. And so we're going to look at a passage out of Mark chapter 12, I believe it is this morning. And the story that we're going to look at today is really interesting. Pastors love this story. And because I'll just give you the quick sum up. So Jesus is there at the temple, and people are kind of putting their offering in, and a bunch of wealthy people go and they put their offering in. And then there's this poor widow. And she comes, and it says that she puts in 2 small copper coins that's worth only a few cents. And Jesus kind of has this moment where he stops everything and he tells people, he goes, this woman put in more than all the rest because she put in everything she has. And then pastors, they use the story to go, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to put in everything you have. And so we go on this big long tangent of like, if you sow in, God will give you back. And so if you give everything, you just need to have enough faith and all these other things along the way. I can't really do a prosperity gospel impression. It's really my thing. But like, that's kind of where it goes. Like, so you just need to give everything. Here's the problem with that, is that's not what the passage says. And I understand why people try to make it say that, because sometimes churches need money, and so they push it on that end. But that's not what the passage says. It's not a passage strictly about money. Now, to prepare for this, it has a little to do with money. Like, money is a part of it. But it's not specifically about money. It's really about how we are meant to carry our beliefs and the posture we're meant to live our lives with. So if you have your Bible with you, whether it's in paper or on your phone, you can open it up to Mark chapter 12 is where we're going to be. We're going to start in verse 41, and if you don't have it, you can follow along on the screen. So it starts with this, verse 41. It says, Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. That's awkward. Is it not? Like, we don't even pass the plates here because that can be kind of awkward. Like this is the picture that we have. Like, they had like a box. They had places where they put stuff. And Jesus kind of like picks a spot like just right across from it. Like, that would be like your church board, who we refer to as the guardians here. Like, each of them pulling up stools next to the tom boxes. And as you walked out, they kind of... Like, that's weird, is it not? And we almost see this like, this is hilarious to me. Like, Jesus sits down right next to it, and the disciples go away. Like, there's like, oh, you're going to sit here? This is where you're... Okay, we're gonna hang out over there. Thanks, Jesus. We don't want to be here. And then it says, this is what happens. It says, many rich people threw in large amounts. We go, well, how did Jesus know they were throwing in large amounts? Like, is that his like supernatural Jesus ability? He just automatically knew what they were putting in. And this is kind of the culture that they had, and this is important to notice, is that people, like, it was, if you were giving, people wanted it to be a public display. Because they wanted people to know how much they were giving and how they were a part of it. So, like, it would almost be like this equivalent. Like, if you had a $20 bill that you were going to give, Like what they would do in this culture is they would go to the bank beforehand. They would cash that $20 bill in for pennies, like $20 in pennies, and then they like get the bag. And so they'd come to put their offering in. They'd just be like, instead of like quietly slipping it in and making no noise, they'd just be like, whoosh. Everybody see? Like that's kind of how the culture. So the fact that Jesus goes like many rich people threw in large amounts, this is not like Jesus like looking through the boxes and using his like X-ray vision, or I'm sure he has something like that. He's not less than Superman. He's got to be more. And so but they made it a big display. And it says this, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. And so we see this contrast. Many rich people threw in large amounts, and then it's got the key word, but a poor widow. So it's showing us there's an alternative to how most people are living right here. And then this is what happens in verse 43. It says, calling his disciples to him. I love this. So Jesus kind of has like this Zach Morris moment where he calls timeout and everything freezes. You know how that goes. And so like he wants like, instead of the shuffle of people just putting their offering in and going, he just kind of go, timeout, hang on. And his disciples, come here. I want you to see something, because something really significant just happened. And so he kind of like pauses everything. He hurries up, brings the people in, and he goes, I want to teach you something. And this is what he says to them. He says, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put more, key words, has put more into the treasury than all the others. Now, question, did she? No. She only put in a few cents. And so, no, she didn't put in more. That's really important to distinguish in terms of how we know that this passage is not specifically about money. It's about how we live our lives. Because if it was just about money, then Jesus would be completely incorrect. And some people come back, and I've heard this response, people are like, well, it's not that, it's the percentage. That's what Jesus is focused about. Like, you really think? Like, I guess I can't completely disagree with that, but you really think that's what's going on? Like, he said to his disciples, she put in more. And they're like, no, we didn't. No, she didn't, Jesus. And Jesus is like, don't you know I'm a percentage guy? I'm like, that's what I am. I've always been a percentage guy. That's what I'm about. So I would say that could we like, it's not about that. Because she didn't put more. There's something different that she does, and Jesus points to it right afterwards. That he doesn't point to her amount. He points to how she does it. And so it's not just how she gives, but it's how she's living her life that he wants to distinguish. So much so that he would call time out on the whole thing and say, as he's like been sitting there, we don't know how long he's been sitting there, it could have been all day, that he would call his disciples in for this moment because he wants to tell them this. They all gave, key word, out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. And that is the focus of those 3 key verses right there. Is this moment right here where he goes, this is what's different, is they gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty. That they're living their lives out of their wealth, out of their abundance, but she is doing it differently. And so what does it mean, the distinction between out of your wealth and out of your poverty? Let me make some observations. First off, when you give or live your life out of your wealth, you're doing it because it's convenient. Like it's just kind of ordinary. It's not that much of a stretch. And so as a part of the fact that it's convenient, you don't really miss it. You don't. For example, hypothetical situation. Let's say you're going out to eat to lunch with a friend for sake of just so you can have an idea. Let's just make it up. Let's say the friend's name is Joel that you're out to lunch with. And the bill comes, and as soon as the bill's set down, Joel, your imaginary friend, kind of does one of these, I forgot my wallet. Can you pay for me? Now, this isn't the first time your imaginary friend Joel has done this. It's happened more than once. But what do you do in that moment? You're not like, you may give him a little hard time. It may come up in a sermon later if you were giving one. Like, that may happen. But what thing you go like this? You're like, yeah, sure, that's fine, man. You go, I'll pay you back. Really, it doesn't matter. It was $6. Like, I can handle it. Don't worry about it. And that's the distinction. When you give out of your wealth, it's not a big deal. Now, when you give out of your poverty, it's something completely different. It's inconvenient. And because, and the alternative to not missing it is a sacrifice. Like it's stretching you in a way. Like for these other people who are going by and they're giving out of their wealth, they're dropping in these large amounts, but they had an enormous amount. So it's nothing to them. And for her, this is a big deal. And it is how she does it that Jesus wants to distinguish. When you give out of your wealth or when you live your life out of your wealth, the things that you do, you're going to feel warm as part of it. And the reason why you're going to feel warm from the things that you do is because it changes others. Now, that is so important to notice here, is these guys who gave, did they do good? Yeah. Yeah, they did good. Was their money going to go to a good purpose? Absolutely. But the thing about the poor widow is instead for her, she's going to feel joy. You go, why would she feel joy when they would just feel warm? Well, it's because when she gives and how she lives, is it changes her. And so for you, it changes you. And this is a distinguishing moment right here that we need to be really clear on. Is when you are living your life out of your wealth, merely giving or serving, or your focus is just on what you have an abundance of, it's still about you. For this lady, it ceased to be about her, and it became about something beyond her. She began to live for something that was outside herself. Now, again, giving out of your wealth, living your life out of your wealth, not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. Jesus is showing us that there is a better way, a different way than we usually see. When you live your life out of your wealth, you're going to do good. But largely, it's about you. When you live your life out of your poverty, you are going to become good because it's about others. And I think it's this distinction right here that makes all the difference in the world. Is because for this poor widow, if you were to examine, like we just have this one moment, this extraordinary moment of this action that she takes, but if you were to examine the rest of your life, this is what I bet you would see. As I would bet you would see that the decisions that she makes, the things that she does, where she spends her time, obviously where she spends her money, it's not about herself. That she begins to live for something that is beyond herself. And so as a result of that, there's no room for arrogance in her life. Like, arrogance is a preoccupation with yourself, which is what I think people have rebelled from when it comes to belief systems, is because we say these beliefs about ultimate truth and eternity and reality and your destiny and what's true about God and what's true about life and what's true about sin. But we do it in such a way that it still seems to revolve around us and how we're right and how everyone else must be wrong. Before this woman, and what Jesus is leading us to, that even though we would maybe believe the exact same things, that we would do it in such a different way because we knew at the end of the day it wasn't about us. I think that's the thing that is so astonishing in this passage, is that if you were to look down at a list, like the other people, they're all Jewish. Like all these people, they're Jewish who are coming in here. They would have all believed the exact same thing, right? Like if you were to give them a statement of beliefs, they would just check them all off because they would have believed the exact same thing. In the moment, they all did the same thing. They all gave. But it's how she did it that was different. And so look at Jesus' words, Matthew 7:16. By their fruit, you will recognize them. Isn't that true? Like, isn't that exactly what happened? Jesus didn't make that statement close to this passage, close to this event. But he's going, no, it's not what they believe. It's not even what they're doing in their life. It's how they're living. It's how they're carrying themselves. It's how they posture themselves that is meant to make them distinct, because everyone really knows at the end of the day they could disagree with what they believe. They could disagree with maybe even the things that they do. But everyone would come to the conclusion that there was something remarkable about the way in which they lived their lives, about the way in which they carried themselves that was so distinct from everyone else. I think the interesting thing when we look at churches and communities of faith as a whole is I think the thing that people have largely rebelled against is arrogance within our faith system. This kind of I'm better than you because I know better than you standard and kind of feeling that we've given off. And so what we wanted it to be different here. We wanted this to be a place where you could come in and you could have no idea what you believe. Or you could just come in and just go, I'm not sure where I am. I'm not sure if I believe any of it. I may believe 80% of it. I may be against all of it. That you weren't exactly sure where you were, but we wanted this to be a safe place where you could come in and you could ask questions and you wouldn't get harsh answers as if you didn't know what you were talking about. That you could come in and you could just kind of explore what it was like to be in a community of faith and to know that this was a safe place for you to figure those things out. We also wanted it to be a place, it's always intriguing to me that most of us would say the most important thing in the world is our belief. It would say that in a moment. Yeah, God, our beliefs, that's what matters. But how for so many of us, like if you look at how we arrived at our beliefs, how did we arrive at it? I mean, for most of us, we may have inherited it or we kind of stumbled into it. That very rarely do we see people honestly open up the pages of Scripture and look like, why do I believe this? Why have I held this to be true? And I think within that comes real arrogance in our faith because we don't know the stories behind it. And so while we wanted this on the one side to be a safe place for people to explore their beliefs, we also wanted this to be a place where those who maybe had never questioned their beliefs, where we would force them to question them. Or maybe if you walked in and you were so sure, like, all these things, I've got it all right, that we would just kind of do this over and over again. Are you sure about that? Okay, let's talk about that one right there. And we would kind of poke people and prod them in different ways. And sometimes that's upsetting to people. The fact that we would actually have to think through our faith. Isn't that funny? It's bothersome to people to go, oh, wait, hang on. At one point in time when I was like in second grade, someone said this and they had a verse associated with it, so it must be true. There can be no other ideas. We go, hey, let's look at all of it and let's see where this leads us. For us, one of the most profound ways that we do that is kind of how we view what happens here on Sunday morning. I think in most churches and most communities of faith, they view the message, the sermon, whatever this thing I'm doing right here is, they view it as the last word on a subject. Like, we're going to talk about this issue, and then the pastor's going to come up and he's going to say, this is what we all must believe. And for us, we view it as the opposite. We view this thing as the first word on a subject. To say, hey, I think we need to talk about this. And so I'll bring up some ideas, I'll bring up some thoughts, and then we'll go and we'll talk about it. And that happens all throughout the week in different avenues. One of the primary ways that happens for us is within our groups, because our groups are always built off what happens here on Sunday morning. They would go, okay, what'd you think? What interested you? What do you want to talk about? What do you want to explore? Let's look at some questions that we have. That the conversation would continue on. And that's why as a church, that's why this is like the only real service that we have. We don't have a Sunday night. We don't have a Wednesday night. I'm not saying we never will have those. I am saying if you're betting, you would probably lose. You shouldn't bet anyway, especially when you lose, because it makes a great sermon illustration for the rest of us. But the reason why we do that is because I really think faith as a whole would benefit from less sermons and more conversations about our faith. And that's what we wanted to create. Because at the end of the day, our biggest hope was not just that you would nail down exactly what you believe, but that you would begin to believe in a different way. That you would hold those beliefs differently. And this is what I've observed, and this is really bothersome to me, if we could say it like this. That people hide poor living behind right beliefs. That people will mistreat others. They will act unloving and unkind and ungrateful to those around them. And then they'll quote a scripture verse as to how they are in the right. And I think that's done more violence to our faith than absolutely anything else. Because we hide a poor life and a poor posture in how we carry our faith behind the fact that we happen to believe things that are correct. And I believe this is how it should be. That if you believe in Jesus, you should live like Jesus. Not just that you would get the statements of what he said, right? But that continuously throughout your life would begin to look more and more like him. That if you believe the things that are right, that your love should increase and your care should increase and your grace towards others should increase just like him. So with that said, let me ask you a question. Are you living out of your wealth? Or are you living out of your poverty? How would people describe you? How do you carry your faith? How do you hold your beliefs? And I don't mean at all in terms of how you came to believe, but how do you believe the things that you hold to be true? I want to talk about a couple areas real quickly. First off, let's talk about money. Because while this passage is not exclusively about money, it does have something to do with money. Jesus said it like this: for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We always get it backwards. We view that he's saying what you care about is where you're going to put your money, but he says the opposite. Where you put your money is going to determine what you care about. And so he says it like this: Jesus doesn't care about your money. I promise you, he doesn't. He's got enough, okay? He can handle it. He's not like withdrawn on his bank account. Oh man, I really hope some stuff comes in this morning. That's not how it goes. What he cares about is your heart. But he knows the best way to your heart is through your checkbook or your banking statement or your Visa card or your Disney Rewards Visa card, however that goes for you. Like, he knows that's how it goes, that where we put our money determines what we're going to care about. And so let me ask for you, when you look at your money, if you sit down, I hope you sit down, I hope you look at it, in terms of your bank accounts and your statements, where does it show the priority is in your life? Where does it show what the value is in your life? And does it show that you're living out of your poverty for something beyond you? Or are you simply living out of your wealth, that it's all focused on you? Second thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about your love, which I know may sound like an odd topic. But this is what I see. We are great at loving and caring for people who are lovable and very easy to care about, right? Like, we are just drawn to those people and we think it's so easy. People who have very few problems in their lives, people who are easy to get along with, man, we just wrap our arms around them because it's so easy. But what we see is Jesus continually moves to the fringes of society where life gets really, really messy. And he begins to embrace those people in their struggle, in their pain, and in their difficulty. Does that look like you? Or when it comes to your care and your grace, is it just for those who are easy to care about and those who are already graceful? Because if we're doing that, we're merely living out of our wealth. We're still making our lives and our relationships about us when Jesus is calling us to something different. Let me ask this, third one. So we talked about money, love. Let me ask you about your time. When it comes to your time, what does it reflect, whether you're living out of your wealth or out of your poverty? Where does the bulk of your time that isn't already set, because I understand you have work, you have other things that are set, where does your time go? And here's what I see, and I have conversations with people, and this is what happens, is I'll hear people say something and they think they've got this, like, oh yeah, I've got this because it's all about my kids. Okay, I understand. Kids before yourself, like, that's okay. Like, the essence of love is you before me, so your kids should be before you. But which is the order? Is it kids, God, you? Or even kids, you, God? Or is God at the top? And then your kids are in front of you. Which one is it? Because this is what I see what happens, is continually throughout our lives, we put kids in the ultimate place of priority in our lives, and then we are shocked when years later they act as if they're God. We put them there. And so we come later on and we go, how are they so narcissistic and how are they so entitled? Well, we put them there. Like, of course they're going to be that way. They don't know any better. If they think that their priority is before God, then they're going to act that way. And so the healthiest thing that we can do is, yeah, put your kids before you. Absolutely, that's the essence of what love is. But make sure God's above that. Make sure that they see that God has the ultimate value in their lives, and then your kids will actually be responsible human beings. And we go years later, the kids can't deal with the struggles in life, and they don't know how to navigate different areas because we've told them all along that they're God and their ultimate importance, and that's too much pressure on them. And so we basically set them up that we put them on a pedestal that was built to crumble from the start, and then we go, what happened? And I think throughout all of this, what Jesus is showing us, that our perspective in our life must continually be that we are living for something beyond ourselves, that is bigger than just us. And I think when this happens, I think when we actually begin to embrace this as a community of faith and as individuals, I think this is the thing that makes a world that doesn't believe and doesn't even know what they believe and doesn't even know if the whole thing matters, I believe it makes them stop and wonder. They go, how is it that ordinary people, ordinary, selfish, sinful people would live for something bigger than themselves? Because the gut reaction every single one of us have when something doesn't go our way, when something isn't according to our preferences, when something happens that we don't like, is to secure our self-interests and act simply in what's best for us. But Jesus leads us into something different. He says, yeah, get what you believe down. But the posture of your faith, the way that you hold those beliefs, must always be you before me, because you are living for something bigger than yourself. And that's something I think every single one of us could embrace. Let me pray for us. Father, I know in my own life, my pride and my selfishness and my sin always seem to be before me. And in moments, in a message, it's easy to explain. But when I'm tired and frustrated, it's really hard to live. And so, Father, for me and for all of us here, I pray that you would give us grace to live life like you. That as we open up the pages of Scripture and as we continually turn to you, that you would see that you did not just give us a superior belief, but a far superior way of living. One that is full of love and mercy and grace. And that if we could just begin to enter into that, the world would become a better place. We would become better people. But at the end of the day, it would all point to you. Because there is no way we can do that without a lot of help from our Savior. So help us pursue you. Help us pursue this better way. And let us be humble, yet bold in our belief. And I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.